And well, now it's time for, I guess, the second segment of the second official segment of the show is stop
Yeah.
putting underage content in your stories, please. As parts 49 to 52 have two characters actively participating in a wedgie who are described as middle schoolish aged.
Oh,
As
gee.
always, don't put underage content in the things you produce. It's no good.
Yeah.
It's only a
So
recipe
true.
for disaster in a community that
Absolutely.
is looking to get off. It's just stop doing it. The elevator wedgie in parts 76 to 77 is really creative to me, and it
Mm.
almost feels allegorical to fetishes, and especially this one in general. You get some moments of privacy and intimacy, but they're often interrupted, and you don't quite get the full satisfaction you were looking for. And that can happen all the time when trying to find media to consume or a partner to act it out with.
Yeah, I like that. There's a really good elevator wedgie in a story called The Remote. I'm trying to remember the name of the writer, but that has some very, very intense wedgie scenes too, and I highly recommend that story for everybody who hasn't read it.
Yeah.
Did I call it The Remote?
Well,
No, it's not called The Remote. I'll
uh,
I'll I'll get the title of it and I'll remind you.
yeah,
Might be similar to the remote, but it's not the one you're thinking of on Lucky Fish forums.
yeah, that's
It's
what I was
one
about to go
on
to.
DeviantArt. It's not that one. There's one on DeviantArt that's really good,
Okay.
and it's the Register. That's what it's called. It's called the
Oh, okay.
Register, and it's by someone called Direct2789.
Mm, okay.
And it's a very good story. It has a very good elevator wedgie, and they've written some other different stories, but the Register is very good story, very intense. Again, psychological realism. Um, but the main characters aren't fetishists, I don't think, which is a cool distinction. But yes, no, it's very interesting to think. And I know I say that a lot. That's my new cliche. It's very interesting. Uh,
That's one thing I
when
would
we
say
look
anyway.
at
So you and I can share that.
totally. When we look at yeah, parts like and I like how some of the chapters are titled too, so overtime wedgie,
Hmm.
things like that. There's a mix between privacy and group settings and a very diverse amount of settings. There's I think rooftops when the boss's son comes in, right? And there's all different kind of areas where wedgies can happen and do happen in the park, like we saw in that other scene you just mentioned,
Hmm.
where the middle school age boys regrettably come in, and things like that, or in a classroom. It's like really any place becomes a playground for their fetish, and they don't hesitate to exercise it everywhere they can, and everything becomes a tool for the fetish in very intense ways. The obvious stuff like flagpoles, and it's like, and now in elevators. That's the thing. Everything and everyone in this world, it feels like, is a wedgie device. Like that's it. That's what it is. And as soon as you meet someone, like I said, the only development is discovering they're into wedgies.
Yeah.
They're fans of the content that
Yep.
Jake and Gwen made, and they're into wedgies. Like
Yeah.
that's what we learn about the characters, and then this cycle of like now they're gonna give some wedgies, and Jake's gonna get some wedgies, and Gwen's gonna give and get to somebody different just
Yep.
to keep things fresh, and
Yeah.
so it's like there's enough to keep things different, and there's different characters that you can be like, oh, they're cool. I like something about them, or they're dynamic, like they're a teacher, and things like that. But it's just the same formula repeated over and over again.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, speaking of things being repeated over and over again, just like with so many stories of Lucky Fetish, and this one brought so many memories of it back, it ends very abruptly, leaving
Yeah.
off with Jake being forced by Laura into stand in revenge, and Gwen
Mm.
about to be attacked by Justin. How
Yeah,
would how would you continue it from there?
man. Well, I would probably have a rich kid and his mother to watch the videos, and then
Huh?
Jake and Gwen reappear into their lives.
That's
It's
weird. I
like
don't know.
it's literally it's
That's
continued.
how I wonder how you came up with that idea. That's so weird.
Yeah. Oh, I'm just so creative. This is why they pay me the big bucks.
Well, okay,
I
so
mean,
in
I mean,
between The
like on a
Inheritance
serious
and Jake and
note,
Gwen.
yeah, I mean, like I mean, on a more serious note, like putting aside the inheritance for a number of reasons, including like we're talking about Jake and Gwen. Plus, I don't know how you felt about it, but I wasn't a huge fan of the kind of the Jewish stereotype of them being rich that they kind of shoehorned in. I was like, that's a little, I won't say anti-Semitic, but stereotypical and not a good trope to include.
Mm,
But let's put all that aside, just to talk about, yeah, like I would have obviously have had some character growth with the characters. Like they have to come to terms with this incredibly unhealthy relationship Jake and Gwen have. Not only this idea that she's trying to be a friend to him, which is not what a mother needs to do, same as like the inheritance, but just on Jake and Gwen, the fact like she has to be a mother to him. She has to discipline, but in appropriate ways, not with more wedgies.
yeah.
Please, no more. Like,
Yeah.
and they need to understand that what they were doing crossed all the
You
lines.
know,
Like, they need to probably get some help.
I gotta say real quick, that's a
Please.
sentence I never thought I'd hear coming out of your mouth. Please, no more wedgie.
Yeah.
That's I never thought I'd hear you say that.
I'm one of the only people who titled the story "No Wedgies Tonight."
Yeah.
So there you go. You know what I mean? Everybody's like more wedgies. What did anime pains call it? Like wedgies again, hero story, something like that. Another wedgie again is what he titled
Yeah.
it, and I go no wedgies tonight. That's my title. So there you go. I'm a trailblazer,
Yeah.
but certainly, yeah, I would need to see the characters grow and evolve
Yeah.
and really change, and like they have to. Obviously, Jake doesn't lose his fetish. He doesn't have to. I don't think that's healthy narrative to create, and not really one the community has explored, thankfully, because I don't want to think about the implications of that, or if people start thinking, "Oh yeah, fetishists need to lose their fetish to be happy," or I don't want to see any of those narratives.
Yeah.
Um, Thankfully stories get unfinished, so we haven't had to deal with what if a bunch of stories went that way or something. Most just end after the first act if they even get that far. But I would love to see them really come to terms with what happened, like them form a healthy relationship, moving on beyond this. Jake sort of dealing with whatever psychological issues he has that's pushed him to be this way towards his mother and basically everyone in his life. He's got a very unhealthy relationship with a teacher who we could say is grooming him as well.
Absolutely.
Almost kind of like he's grooming his mother, and now the teacher's kind of grooming him because she's in a position of authority. The mother should also know better, so maybe you could also see it as the mother grooming him as well. 'Cause he may give that first wedgie, but certainly she encourages it. She plays into it, so it is like this grooming of him, and it's very unhealthy and very problematic. So having to deal with that is not easy. It would take a lot of time and effort and become a very boring, like he had a lot of trauma, that Jake kind of story, and
Yeah.
here's how he worked through it, and now he's living on a beach somewhere writing about his life or something. I don't know, something like that, some
Yeah.
movie ending kind of thing. But I would certainly want to see all that explored. I don't
Definitely.
think that's the Wedgie Lover 109 cares about any of that. It's
No.
not that realistic. It's a hot wedgie parade is what it is. So I mean, trying to keep that in mind, which is hard for me to do when I want to tell like real to life kind of narratives, even if they're set in fantasy worlds or whatever. Like I guess it's just a series of hotter and hotter and hotter wedgies to like
Yeah.
I guess there's a giant. Every single person we've met is involved in one giant wedgie orgy, and it's like breaks a world record or something. And they get all the money because of how many views their wedgie orgy gets online or something. And Justin bankrolls them forever.
Yeah.
Justin and Jason,
Mhm.
both the rich kids, bankroll them for life or something, and they can
Yeah.
make content. Maybe
Yeah.
that's how you end it, you know?
I think you bring up a very valid point of Laura Krauss sort of grooming Jake into what she wants him to be because she's clearly sexually, I guess, traditionally sexually interested in him, where she
Yeah.
gives him an over the clothing hand job essentially, and
Yeah.
she is doing a lot more traditionally sexual things, like sending him pictures of herself and that kind of thing. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, I guess I won't go any further than that. There's a thought related to that well, I'll get into a little bit later. But
Cool.
yeah, I mean, we have the inheritance now, and that's I can see that being like how the characters would progress a couple years down the line. But I'd want to continue it like Jake and Gwen, and like maybe end it as like explaining how Jake and Gwen stopped having their relationship, how they grew apart, and how all
Yeah.
these relationships ended. Like, where did Justin go? Where did Laura Krause go?
Yeah.
Why did Rebecca not care that she wasn't making any money off of their clips anymore? All these
Yeah.
unanswered questions that not like in the bad way, not leaving me wanting more, but
Yeah.
why wasn't this answered when you
Hmm.
so easily could have been? Like
Yeah.
all those things that just need some kind of answer because they are the most integral parts of the story, and they just
Yeah.
disappear. So that's how I would continue
Totally.
it,
I like
and
that.
just
That's
sort of, I
very
guess,
apt.
bridge the gap between Jake and Gwen and the inheritance.
Yeah, that's great.
So this story is set in the real world. And so when looking at how Jake and Gwen encounter fetishists who actually consume their clips, I think it's pretty fascinating to dive into just who Laura Krause and Justin, last name unknown, are and how they
Yeah.
portray this fetish differently.
I like that. So, what do you when you say they portray it differently? What do you have in mind? How do you see that play out?
So Laura Krause, I sort of she's like the sort of a person who wants to give and receive and sort of like the likes the back and forth, like the wedgie buddy type of thing, um, and more of an equal relationship. And Justin is much more of the. I think a pretty good majority of this community is just they want to be the ones giving, and they are like I feel like Justin can be seen as sort of a whatever the term is, where like the character is someone that everybody wants to be. Right? He can manipulate his way into making the situations he wants to happen, and he's got all these resources, and like he's kind of untouchable in some senses. And um, I guess maybe they don't portray the fetish itself differently, but they portray uh, different ways to that the fetish affects people and how it can control them or how it can uh, decide how they make decisions. That kind of sort of like how people are like a lot of the time men are sort of led by their dicks. Like they sort of
Mm,
think with their crotches rather than their brains. And it's like
sure.
yeah, that's kind of what I'm going at here.
Okay, yeah, I get that. Yeah, I mean, Jake is pretty much like the self-insert wedgie fetishist, and Wedgie Lover 109 is trying to explore with him, it seems, what a wedgie fetishist feels, what would drive them to want to, for example, give their mother very intense wedgies, and that for Jake is he's been bullied, he wants the power that he's lacked, and he craves this control, which is understandable. And in any instance, we would want as people to have power when we don't.
Yeah,
Um, so we understand that. And certainly, yeah, I think what we see with Laura Krause and every other character is it's this exploration of why people are driven to do what they do with the fetish. Like, what is it that's motivating them? How, like, what element of the fetish do they are they fascinated by, basically, or do they portray more to what you were saying? So with Laura Krause, it's clearly like she is the embodiment of the hot teacher trope. Same as Justin is another similar self insert, but this time he's the fetishist with who has absolute power, who doesn't have to worry about consequences, who can give wedgies just because he has money. And he has a really good reason for doing what he wants to do whenever, because he's rich. Where Jake is like, he has the kindness of his mother to allow him to give wedgies, and his own, I guess, boyish attractiveness that helps him with Laura Krause, who wants to dominate and is clearly like some kind of predator for uh, younger kids in their 20s or whatever. So, yeah, I feel like certainly it's kind of these tropes. We get the hot mom, the MILF in her 50s. We get the self-insert wedgie fetishists. We get the hot teachers who are super into the guy for no reason other than they're the main character of the
Yep.
story. So I certainly get what you're saying. It feels like the question is really, how do they embody the fetishist's fantasies, and what do they represent in terms of our tropes, and what is familiar to us with the characters, certainly. And it's quite easy to pick out what that is with them. I mean, Rebecca is a sort of manipulative, bitchy sister who's setting up a bunch of wedgies, and Paul is a stereotypical jock bully. It's like, and you can look at everybody and point out what sort of trope and role they fill in necessitating the wedgies. The dad is this pretty absent, sort of frightening authority figure who tries to bring authority back into his home. The one thing that's sort of upturned by that is he fails. He has no effect
Yeah.
on the story or the action like at all, and he's just like a sort of pawn of Rebecca, who's the evil mastermind character. Think Lisa
Mhm.
from Two Worlds and Friend Sessions, for example. The light Yagamis of the community. These sort
Yeah.
of manipulative superhuman geniuses. And some of us are certainly like that, right? We're certainly growing up trying to get wedgies. We are manipulative, and we try to do things like that. So it's capturing a lot of the fetish and how it can be exercised, but also how we fantasize. And Wedgie Lover 109, like we said from the beginning, he understands what it is that turns us on, the fantasies the community has, and he plays into it again and again and again.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. And something of note with Jake as well is that it's not just that he wants power because he's been powerless in so many situations. It's like
Yeah,
it's very clearly shown that he's sexually interested in his mom.
yeah.
And so with that, I think Jake is a pretty interesting character study into how one's surroundings can affect who they grow up to be. So my question to you then is, do you think people fall into the roles they play in life because of external factors, or is it that they were already like that?
Yeah, I think it's a mix because I think it's the same answer to the similar question of how is the fetish made? Is it psychological, like something internal, or is it external? Nature or nurture? And I think we've
That's
chatted
exactly what
about
it
that.
is.
The
I was just
age
trying
old
to just trying to
psychological question, nature or
absolutely.
nurture. I got you. Don't
Yeah.
worry, I got you.
Just
That's why I'm
reskin
here, the unofficial
yeah.
co-host.
Yeah.
You had it though. You had
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Just different
Just
different color of the underwear, so to
yeah.
speak.
Just reskinning the question so it's not just me
Yeah,
asking
I
that.
love it. No, but I think it's a great question. So certainly when we look at Jake and we look at even Gwen, like it's he seems to answer that it does fall in the middle, that there's something a bit different about Jake in the brain. He's so attracted to his mom. Because a lot of us aren't. We're not Norman Bates like Jake kind of is, with this strange obsession with his mother sexually. And maybe that's where the story's going. The Norman Bates psycho wedgie stories. It's just gonna be pretend to be
Yeah.
his mom. Maybe he
Maybe
was his mom the whole
maybe
time.
maybe he's the guy who killed that guy with the atomic wedgie.
That could be it. That could be Jake. I wouldn't be surprised if that was Jake. I could see it. It feels like a Jake, totally. So I feel like it's the answers to me has always been it lies in that middle ground of
Yeah.
there's something in our brain, something in Jake's brain in this instant, and there are those external factors, the things that we see, that we experience, and for Jake, that can be that powerlessness. It feels like he's into wedgies before his sister puts him into a position where he's constantly getting them from bullies. But I think we also know that he sort of got them a bit before that too. So it's probably that sort of trigger, which we know realistically for fetishists, it is occasionally a case where they get them and then that sort of triggers the fetish. More often, as I know from like the demographic survey I did, it's most commonly like people see it in cartoons and TVs and movies, and that triggers something. The reason I'm so sure it's not just something psychological or just something external is like if it was just seeing cartoons and wedgies, everybody would be like a wedgie fetishist. Like of our generation, because those cartoons are so popular, they'd be
Mhm.
everywhere. People would be into wedgies, you know. But
Yeah.
because we're a small subgroup who share that very similar origin story, it makes me think there must be something in our brains that's a bit different, and then some similar external factors that
Mhm.
motivate it. Um, so that's probably where my answer falls in
Okay.
terms of Jake, and that he's a product of both,
Yeah.
like who he is and life's choices, as you phrased it, and the things that happen to him in life.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I think you're. It really is just the age old psychology question of nature versus nurture, and yeah, but I think
Yeah,
it is the middle. Like I don't think it can be one way or the other entirely.
yeah, that's where I fall. Some
Yeah.
scientists, researchers are like they're sure it's one or the other. They know that it's got to be all nurture, and it's you're something wrong with your brain. It doesn't matter what happens to you in life. It's the spiritual opposite. They go, no, it only matters what happens. But I don't think from my life and when I know of the community that like for us that's true, and I'm extrapolating that to Jake and his experiences, and I feel like that's what Wedgie Lover 109 is going for. I think that's why he's preoccupied with telling us things like Gwen saw wedgies when she was younger, but didn't think much of them. She would laugh when she saw them, or things like that. Jason, Maria, similar stories where like they didn't care about wedgies until they did. It's all of a
Yeah.
sudden. It's not like they were born like that. Some happen, but obviously, despite the fact basically everyone and elevators are into wedgies in his universe, it's like uh, it feels like there's clearly they are fetishists. They are other in this
Yeah.
world, you know. So it feels like he's
Yeah.
just capturing a lot of our experience in the story.
Absolutely. And with that, one of the more introspective aspects that I found of the story is Gwen trying to figure out why she's dived so deeply into wedgies.
Mm.
But an
Yeah.
actual answer is never provided. It's just always she's always questioning it. So I'm curious why you think it happened.
Yeah, other than it was convenient hot device, not plot device, hot device to
Good play on words there.
make her into them and have her into it, and that little tease like we said is permeates the story of psychological realism and character development where we touch on something but we don't go too deep because that's not the point is the wedgies. I think it's that, but it's also probably just the core idea that we as fetishists don't know why we're so interested in it. And we've seen a lot in stories, particularly characters who sort of realize they're into something and quickly dig into it and aren't entirely sure why. Like, um, Legacy. No, it was it's not. Was it Aftermath? Was that the story title? There was a
Hmm.
really good one on Lucky Fish forums, not super recently. That
Describe it.
it wasn't the legacy of like the robbery of the Chloe story, but I think it
Yeah.
was maybe called Aftermath, where similarly no, it's called Awakening. Sorry, Awakening by Mr. Unknown Face, where similarly a character gets a wedgie, and they have that very similar, very familiar cliche trope scene, which I love, where a character goes online and starts researching wedgies and finds a bunch of stories and art and goes down the rabbit hole. You know, it's like if there were a movie, that would have to be one of the scenes where you see a character hammering on their keyboard and going down the rabbit hole and discovering there's a community here, as many of us did. So I think it's probably Wedgie Lover 109 trying to figure out and touch on that question. without ever going too deep into it, but just
Hmm.
introducing it as like, why is she into this? She wonders it. Don't worry, she wonders about it. Because if she didn't, that would be a bit weird and it wouldn't be as realistic. It wouldn't have this quasi realistic element to the story. But she's not going to find an answer, both because she really can't, because
Yeah.
it's kind of hard. And it also, kind of, in another more complicated way, is kind of limiting. If we say, oh, she has a fetish, it's like, wow, that developed kind of quickly, and it just happened because she got them, which isn't really how it works. I think, as a lot of us who know who's given people wedgies, they don't. They may enjoy the feeling of it, but they're not instantly going to become a fetishist. If they were, our lives would be so much easier. We'd be terraforming people constantly into wedgie fetishists. But unfortunately, life isn't that easy. So I think it's just a case of like there's no real answer to that question that he knows, that anyone really knows,
Yeah.
of why she's so interested. And so we get to you get that little instance of, I guess, what we could call indirect detail or an unanswered question of like, is she into them? Is she just kind of enjoying the feeling? Does she like being dominated or something? And you can kind of ask a bunch, which is good.
Hmm.
Although the fact it's kind of like just something that's touched on from time to time and not really explored, especially when it has such severe implications into her life, into her son's life, like it's pretty intense. If it was like she had like a relationship with a boyfriend or something and she didn't want to think too much about it, okay. But it's like you're doing this to your son,
Yep.
and you're like you're doing this to your son. You're getting him
Yes.
off. You're getting yourself off. Like, don't you think you want to stop and kind of figure your shit out?
Yes. Yeah, but I mean, I'm just very appreciative that there's anything at all that we can take away from the story and think about later.
For
That's
sure.
even in this entirely porn story. It's nice.
Yes, it is. It certainly is. That they sort of respect, like we said, our interests and our fascinations enough, and realize that we do care on some level about understanding who we are, very human need. And so we get a little bit of that. Never too much, never enough, really, I think,
Mm-mm-mm.
but certainly enough that it adds that grounding of realism, and then we get right into the wedgies,
Yeah.
and it sort of helps because you're kind of in her mind, and that's what we
Hmm.
talked about from the beginning. It's understanding what characters are thinking and feeling, and that's something he's always been pretty good at capturing when it comes to wedgies. Not beyond it really, because they're all very single-minded, but when it comes to like what are they thinking and feeling about wedgies, we get that much.
Definitely. Yeah, absolutely. And so with these characters, we're able to find out to some extent where Jake, Gwen, and Rebecca are in life after the story stops through the inheritance. But where do you think Laura Krause and Justin are now? Because they have not yet been brought up.
Yeah. They're either with each other, living it up, some wedgie paradise, just the two of them, or they're probably both in jail for like grooming kids, and we know Jason's already like a mess. Like he's spiraling before he meets Gwen and stuff about he's sleeping with all these women and stuff. Like if he's not
Hmm.
in jail, I wonder he might even be dead. Like he's living Justin, sorry, that is Justin, the boss's rich son. He's spiraling. He's probably gonna be like dead in a ditch somewhere if he's not in jail for abusing whatever power and white privilege he thinks he has.
Well, Jason, once he fucks up with his mom, ends up doing all that. But Justin, I don't. As far as I can recall, Justin, nothing like that ever happens to Justin.
No, that's what I mean. Like that's what I wonder if
Oh,
that's
oh,
where he would
oh.
go. That
Okay.
was your question. Like what's next for him and Laura Krause.
Yeah, yeah.
Um and yeah, I imagine both of them, the way they're living their lives, her grooming kids, like I'm assuming if she's doing this with Jake, it's probably not the last time she's gonna do this. There's probably a pattern of kids before him and probably after him, and even if she has to kind of ease some of them into wedgies, I imagine this is something that she's gonna do again or has done or maybe will do, and that's probably gonna get caught for it eventually. And Justin, similarly, like I said, they feel like they're on these very dangerous paths that realistically they would have to, like, their punishment would come for them, I would think.
Yeah, it actually kind of makes me, the way you described Laura Krause there kind of makes me think of uh, the teacher Blake from Shameless, who moves into their neighborhood, and
Hmm.
she's a
Love
pedophile.
Shameless. Yeah.
Yes, yeah,
I
it's
probably didn't get that far in Shameless. Was that one of the later seasons?
no, that was season 3.
So, okay, so I would have seen that, and I just totally forgot about Blake.
Yeah, it was a single
100%.
episode.
Yeah, okay.
Oh,
That's what
she's
I
so
remember.
hot though.
That was such a great show.
Yes, it is.
Everybody's very hot in that show.
Yeah,
Well, what
the
the
of age, at least the of age
Fiona,
characters.
Fiona's hot. The rest
Oh
are
yes,
not hot.
yes. Well,
But
lip is pretty
yeah,
hot. That's a
yeah,
yeah, but yeah, there.
and he's gone off to do a lot of very successful things, like The Bear, good TV series. The
Yeah,
Bear, if you like cooking.
yeah. He was
Um,
in a really good movie, a scary movie too.
yeah,
What's it called?
yeah, you're right. Yeah, they've both done, and Ian too's done. He's doing better now. He's the guy in the Jedi games,
Yeah,
those Star Wars
which
Jedi
I thought was all
games.
right, but I wish I hadn't modeled him exactly after him.
Yeah, it looks just like it was crazy. But yeah, that's a funny little tangent digression. Yeah, it's I feel like that's the thing with Miss Krause, Justin. We get a taste of who they are for the porn purposes, enough to set them up as these tropes. But what we're hinted at is like that could be much bigger stories. Like Miss Krause and her getting caught for what she's doing, her having a history of this behavior. Clearly, if she's going this far with students in a classroom, she, like many of the other characters, lacks self control. Like, so probably she's not able to stop herself from continuing this behavior. So I imagine there must be some consequences
Yeah,
coming to them.
yeah.
Absolutely.
And I would, for anybody who's interested in horror movies, but like especially you, Hans,
Yeah, love
I'd
horror.
recommend The Rental. It's got
Okay.
the actor who plays Lip. He's a star in it. It's pretty good.
Yeah.
It's a pretty good scary movie, although it doesn't get high ratings for some reason. I thought it was really good. But,
Yeah, sometimes
yeah,
horror doesn't. Just too bad.
yeah.
If you're like me, you like movies like Terrifier 2. That was great. Love Terrifier 2.
But
Art the
yeah,
Clown.
so despite there being numerous characters in the story, almost all of the major events happen between two characters.
Yeah.
Anime panties might be the most immediate choice when thinking of creators who
Mm,
feature binaries, but it seems to be that they extend far further than just him, whether it's intentional
absolutely.
or otherwise.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny, like I always say 3 is the magic number, and it's true, but for simplicity purposes and for many reasons, including the fact with you when you have two characters, you can have head to head. When you have 3, it's like you have a trilogy, you can have them interacting with each other. When it's two people, you cannot avoid the head to head clashes. So, iconic stories, some of the most iconic and popular stories, ones we've talked about here, Sore Winner, Luckily Unlucky. Those are two character shows.
Hmm.
Other people are on the periphery, but it's the main two characters. Lucy and Daniela, right, was two
Hmm.
characters. Before I started looking at broader YWNR, which is 3, but Teacher, what'd you find? Two characters. It's something I've long been interested in because you really can dig deeper into them a bit quicker. You can show obviously traditional romantic relationships because they're gonna. It's like the rom com of like the one and the two characters getting together. You don't have that in 3 unless you have love triangle stuff, which we sometimes get in the community, sure, but a lot of the stories we get are two characters. All
Yeah.
the like even between two cheeks, right? It was Ashley and it was Luna. It was like
Yep.
two characters that carried the brand. The same thing. Here we have Jake and Gwen, or we have later on Maria and Jason in the sequel.
Well,
Like,
yeah.
and it's these two characters again. It's their dynamic, and you get to explore that very in a very core way. We get to see obviously mother son that
Well, yeah.
dynamic explored
You can,
deep, and you get that a lot.
and then you also have uh, Gwen and Justin, and then Jake
Yeah.
and Laura Krause. So, um, yeah, I also wonder if it's if the at least the roots of it come from so many of us when we came into this fetish when we were young, and so our worldviews hadn't really been shaped very much, and so we're still sort of seeing things in black and white as
Mm.
opposed to gray, and there's a myriad of different things and aspects that happen with each thing. I wonder if that sort of bleeds into it to some degree, if our simplistic worldviews are sort of being reflected in what we're writing.
Yeah, potentially. I mean, you could read like a Jake and Gwen, and you could defend the incest and be like, you come from it from a very old timey traditional view where incest is bad and things like that. And you could look at it and say, oh, but incest is just not what you're used to, therefore it's good. So, like, there's that gray, but I don't think we're going to get a lot of that kind of gray in our minds. Probably because we know from a health perspective, incest super dangerous, plus very unhealthy and problematic, and super taboo. Obviously, the sort of gray I'm more interested in, and it's the sort of things that I think we're chatting about, is like just the fact that these dynamics of two characters, if it's a son or a daughter or if it's a brother and sister, which we also see a bit, and that's a more cerebral battle between Jake and his sister Rebecca, or if it's two worlds where it's two women, two fellow students, two peers who become romantic partners, or if it's anything from the traditional two sisters to two friends. Like, and these go all the way down to the first stories in the community where we see two people getting together, wedgies, two people. It's a two-person act, right? At its core, is what wedgie is. You can do self wedgie, but that's a self wedgie. It's not wedgie, self wedgie. So
Yep.
wedgies at their core are a two-person act. They require two people, and I think from that fundamental level, we're gonna see people explore these dynamics that are interesting, that either whether they've seen porn before and understand some of those dynamics that are familiar or hot, in terms of if it's the therapist with power, the teacher with power, the mother with power. It might just be, wouldn't it be hot if an older character, an older sister, gave one to a younger sister? It's still that
Hmm.
power. There's still that, the whole idea of them being older, that sort of thing. There is a power there. There's an element that we can look at and say someone has more power, someone's going to lose that power, someone's going to take it. You're inverting it if the younger sister gives to the older, more popular one. It's popularity, another lever of power, of who's going to dominate, who's going to submit, because we have these ideas in our head of what's appealing, power, popularity, these high schooly tropes, that which is integrally tied to the fetish. It's all connected, certainly. So I think that's where a lot of these dynamic comes from, this mess of concepts we take with us when we understand what we like about the fetish. Before we even understand what we like about it, we understand on a core human level, like it's power, it's control, it's bullying, because bullying is power and domination, submission, and it goes on and on and on. So, and then obviously, yeah, there's some people who are going to explore more taboo stuff, whether it's because they're thinking in that gray area. I think more commonly it's just because the dynamic seems hot to them.
Hmm.
And they may not even be thinking about how taboo something like incest is when they're
Yeah.
writing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, really, writing is one of the great beauties and joys of it is just people being able to explore whatever ideas they want to, um, in however
Yeah.
whichever way they want to take them. So yeah, I mean, we have all these social norms and taboos and
Hmm.
constructs and all that, but in writing, you're able to create whatever world you want, and whatever you'd like to happen can happen. So
It's true.
yeah.
Better or for worse.
Yep. So with all this, I mean, really, even the thought of doing anything remotely sexual with a relative is disgusting to me. Yet
Mm.
the story is so hot, and I
Yeah.
love reading it because of that.
Yep.
Why do you think people go further in their fantasies in the media they consume to get off than they would ever in real life?
Yeah. I mean, the obvious answer is like you would get arrested, you would get punished, there are consequences, right? In the stories, there are no consequences by and large, and it's something I've long been fascinated, preoccupied, and bothered by. That's one of the first tropes and cliches I identify really as a genre. It's like, where's the consequences? Where are people getting in trouble for what they're doing? And that's either because stories don't go long enough for us to get to that, or there's just no interest in exploring it, or the consequences are something like, I'm mad at you for a bit, but now I'm not. And it's like, that's like, you don't understand the gravity of what you've done, wedgie pun intended somewhat. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, you have the simple limitations of like, if people were to do what they did in a Wedgie story, it would get them in serious trouble. Like, so that's why I doubt seriously you have like even uh even beyond the number of 10 or something flagpole wedgies in real life. There's probably been some somewhere, but I doubt there's been as many as the community would love to see. Underwear is not as easy a stretch over the head unless it's some super stretchy spandex pair made to go kind of easily over the head, you know? Or it obviously takes an insane amount of time that isn't realistic. So in stories, we get to see everything we want, all our fantasies, and it's safe. That's the
Yeah.
thing. That's the thing with consuming media and whatever it is. It's safe. It's detached from real life. We don't have to worry about any number of things that could threaten us in terms of consequences, danger of the actual wedgies, because wedgies do hurt and they have done damage and they can do damage. Whereas if we're reading a story, people can take insane amount of punishment, but no one's really getting hurt. That's the thing. No one's getting hurt except for the writer's fingers if they're tired or something. That's it. Like, so obviously all of those kind of I'm sure pretty evident reasons of why like we can go as far as we go, and you want to explore things, you want to push the boundaries. Like I said, I've had people ask me about where's the mother and son, mother daughter wedgies. It's not really common, so I think it goes back to what we were saying. There's things we're gonna latch onto. If there's types of content we haven't seen before, but that explores different dynamics around power and control, domination, submission, we're going to want to explore that and see it as readers, even if it's taboo and uncomfortable. And if the story's well written, we're going to enjoy the wedgies. Like
Mhm.
that's what I've said always. That's why stuff like underage content is so dangerous. Because if there's wedgies in it, we're going to get turned on. And we're not gonna be thinking about minors being sexualized, for example, or the taboo elements like we sometimes can forget about in Jake and Gwen. You're just enjoying it for the very intense wedgies.
Mhm.
Whereas, like in real life, people would not go around giving their mom wedgies. They just wouldn't do any number of the things we see. It would never happen,
Yeah.
ever, never,
Absolutely.
never, never.
Absolutely. That's yeah, I can't think of anything else to add to that. That was really well said, and I think it's a lot of it has just we've just covered it before as we've just talked about it before. So, yeah, I think that covers it greatly. So, I guess in the same vein then, do you think there are some lines that shouldn't be crossed or certain areas that are off limits to us?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and I've talked about this before and joked about like how I'm into horrorcore music, really intense horror movies like Terrifier 2, which is super gory and violent. If anybody knows Art the Clown, you'll know what I'm talking about. Like those are crazy, over the top, like crazy. Were you gonna
I
say
did
something?
yeah,
What?
it actually just remind me I watched a scary movie last night,
Yeah.
called Compliance. That is just
Okay.
unnerving and it's uncomfortable to watch. So I'd
Yeah.
recommend that if you like scary movies or you just want
Yeah.
to watch
So
something that
like,
sort of subverts the normal expectations of what a horror movie is.
nice. I love it. That's great. So, and that's what I'm talking about. So, I'm more open to this than a lot of people are. And I've talked to MA Panties, and on that group podcast we did talking about the community, I was a sort of outlier in saying I'm open if people want to try a lot of different things. If you want to do horror, if you want to go darker and go deeper and explore things like, and I applauded you, and I've done this when you explore rape, for example, in your stories. Obviously, it doesn't need to be gratuitous. It doesn't need to be rape for rape's sake. Just like nothing needs to be. Same as like when I see movies with sex in it, I'm kind of just like, why is this here? Unless there's an important plot reason, in which case I really enjoy it for that. Because I'm also, as a wedgie fetishist, just bored when I see people having sex. I'm like, I don't get it. I want to know where the wedgies are. It makes no sense to me. So but I'm very open generally with a lot of exploration. I've tried to go darker in some of my stories. I've included death, for example, in a story like The Wedgie Killer. My least favorite
YWNR.
I've done, yeah, YWNR. We had cancer as well, and it had death, and it had grief and things like this. So I'm interested in a lot of that exploration in sort of violence, in pushing the boundaries beyond like, oh, we're friends giving each other wedgies to like, what if someone's been kidnapped and they're forced to? And I've done that as well. Or very intense ones like Freedom is found in prison wedgies, where a character kidnaps another and now they're in prison for that act, and there's wedgies and very intense stuff. I think there's a lot that we can do. Stuff that I shy away from, stuff like incest. If it's light, if it's a mother and a son and there's a wedgie or something, I'm going to be more open to that than obviously stuff if it's super sexual, like they're having a lot of sex or something, and it's like the wedgies aren't as important. That's probably where I'll stop being interested there. Jake and Gwen, since they're like, it's all been wedgies except for like you mentioned, like a hand job and some other small stuff. Um, it really is hasn't like lost that power for me. Things like bestiality, I don't know why we go down that route. Um, and it's funny because there's a
Yeah.
few things that I've seen that I don't think anyone in the community would call bestiality, and I don't either. But it's funny to occasionally joke and be like, "Isn't that kind of bestiality?" I'm thinking of like alternative punishment when the dog grabs the underwear and runs, and I've joked to anime paintings being like, "Hey, that the dog was given a wedgie. That's the dog was doing that," and he's been like, "Nah, that's not bestiality. I never thought about it like that." So I'll joke, and I mean stuff like that uh, is sort of fun, cartoony examples of stuff that you can get away with. But if you think deeper about it, or and then obviously the thing with bestiality is like the whole question of the furry community, but they're anthropomorphized anyway, so it's not the same thing, obviously. So
It
it's
still
not even
kind of is
fair
in my mind.
compare them. But certainly it's gonna be for yeah, it's for some people who are like, why? I don't understand the appeal of animals and stuff. And I have read some stories. I've liked them for the wedgies, but I'm not someone who's sort of into furry content generally. Although like, but that's for the me again. That's not a line. Um, things I know it's my tastes have changed over time too. Like I didn't want to see blood, and I still don't really with a wedgie, but I'm not too worried if there's violence in a story. If you have gunfights in one scene and wedgies in another. So I suppose super violent wedgies I'm not super into, where people are bleeding and getting cut up or something, I guess, while wedgies are happening, like this sort of gross mutilation. And that's maybe just because we haven't seen that in the community. We've seen some crazy like deaths and stuff and horror stories and stuff occasionally in the community, but still pretty rare. So like I'm pretty open to a
Yeah.
lot of stuff, but obviously no underage content,
Yes.
no bestiality with animals. Uh, that might be it.
Yeah.
That might be
Yeah.
the two hard lines for me, you know.
Yeah. I
But I'm
was.
open to like all different dynamics. Obviously FMMM. I'll read all that stuff, and I do read it. Things like that, and the levels of violence. I probably will draw a line after a while if people are bleeding and being in a lot of pain. But But certainly to a large extent, we see Jake and Gwen very intense, very people in pain, and for a lot of that, I'm into it, and I'm not going to draw the line. So it's difficult, and that might change over time, as it has for me. I've my tastes have, I guess, gotten more open as I've
Yeah.
grown.
Yeah, and it sounds like a lot of that really is just things you're not interested in seeing rather than things that we should not as a community explore. And so like underage content, that's the one thing that I feel like we should never cross ever.
Yeah,
And we still do, but I
absolutely.
think we should constantly try to avoid it just because it's bad. And
Hmm.
if you'd like to hear why, you can listen to the I can't remember what episode number it is now, but the splitting the cheeks episode with Hans. Those two episodes, the two-parter there. You listen to the second part if you'd like to hear why it's not good to do that. But
Yeah.
other honestly, I'm not really sure there are as long. I guess I can't really think of any other actual lines or things we shouldn't go into
Yeah.
as I think pretty much everything else is fine with some stipulations and guidelines, like you like it's like rape, as what I brought up with my with fortunate events is like you gotta I think you think it's perfectly fine to put in as long as you're treating it with respect and
Mm,
you're I guess with some things you're not making light of it or and you like
yeah.
there's just like I think there's certain guidelines that you should follow. Um,
Yeah.
just to like especially if it's like a crime or if it's something that's just morally not okay.
Yeah.
Like you don't try and normalize it or make it seem like it is okay or that kind of thing.
Yeah. That's good.
So normally I'd ask who you think the best character is, but in Jake and Gwen, every single character is twisted in some way, with some examples being Jake having sexual thoughts about relatives, Gwen simply accepting the roles pushed on her and not fighting back with any authority, even when she has every right to, Rebecca not caring about her family and blackmailing them for money, and their
Yeah.
dad being completely absent from his family. Who do you think is the most twisted of all the characters?
I'll say Rebecca because she puts a lot in motion. If you look at like his recent post, he sort of it feels like is almost retconning it to make her the real big bad of their whole family and story and setting up most of the action that we see. But certainly you summed her up of like this character doesn't care about anyone but herself. She's using the relationships she gets into, people like Paul, just to torture her brother, just to film the content to torture him more, and then eventually basically make them like this indentured servitude to her where they have to start a
Yeah.
business, run it, and give her money. And it's
Mhm.
like, wow, like that is some twisted shit. Um, and I liked Rebecca. I think she's very hot for some of that, like how twisted she is, and it was very satisfying in recent parts of Inheritance where we got to see her get a wedgie. I love that a lot. But certainly, it's obviously no different from all the incest stuff we've been seeing. Now it's just a brother doing it to his
Yeah.
sister with the mom's encouragement. It's quite disturbing stuff when you think about it.
Yeah.
But
I mean,
obviously very exciting in a lot of
with
ways too because
with
it's well
that
described.
with that, there's a precedent from Jake and Gwen of
Yeah.
when their dad finally uh, discovers what's going on and he brings the hammer down. It's Gwen who pushes him to give Jake the atomic wedgie. Um, but I mean, I was very happy to see that Rebecca finally got her comeuppance in the inheritance,
Yep.
but I didn't think it was very satisfying at all the way it happened. It was just, oh, of course it's gonna happen this way because everything else happens this way. Why not have it
Yes.
this way? So, but
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
that's
It's
the
familiar.
inheritance.
It's repetitive.
That's the
Certainly. Yeah.
inheritance. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, it's I have to agree. I think Rebecca is the most twisted because like
Yeah.
at the very least, at least their dad likes Rebecca and like loves Rebecca the most of all of them, and probably has still has some feelings for his wife, but like Rebecca doesn't even care about any of them, and she as you said, she's so manipulative. Like she's just manipulating her dad to do these things when he comes
Yeah,
in. Like she really is just an abhorrent person and just awful, 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 and
totally.
I hate her.
Uh, yeah, as characters, it's like they all seem kind of similar. They're all kind of whiny, and they all kind of like have the same thoughts around wedgies. Like, oh, I want to be the one giving, but then when they're getting, they're super into it too. And you're like, hey, y'all kind of have the same reactions. Anybody realize that? But yeah, Rebecca, for all of her sort of manipulative ploys, and she's one of the few characters we get alone, right? At least in the beginning, who isn't Jake or Gwen. She's someone whose perspective and POV we get, which is rare.
Yeah,
Um, Whereas the rest of the story is through their eyes. We never see that later on, really. We see it, I think, a bit occasionally when she's setting some stuff up and manipulating them and planning to and stuff with the dad giving Jake the wedgie, like you said. But yeah, really, it's the sort of rare instances where we get to see through her
yeah,
POV, which I like. But
yeah.
yeah, certainly probably my favorite because she is so twisted.
And she's also probably the only character of all of them that isn't just into wedgies. It's like she's
Yeah,
wedgies are the conduit for her to the current conduit really for her to uh get what she wants. Like if it
yeah,
wasn't if it wasn't wedgies, it'd probably be something else.
yeah,
She likes the just the domination of people she doesn't care for or sees as lesser, I guess,
yeah,
rather than
yeah,
like
totally.
every single other character loves just the actual wedgies.
Yeah, yeah. Because it's funny, like she's someone who doesn't give them or get them until like we see in the inheritance, but she's behind the scenes manipulating them so they do happen. So that's kind of interesting. But yeah, really, she is this fascinating, like manipulative figure who feels like a sociopath. If you look at her, it's like she doesn't care
Yeah,
about anybody. I almost wonder if she's like asexual and just uses sex as a tool because she understands from like Paul that'll get what like the results she wants, and so like she is. Maybe that's how cold of a person she comes off as. That's how like hollow she seems. Of just like her purpose is to torture her brother, and she
yeah,
enjoys that as much as she seems to be able to enjoy anything.
hmm,
But yeah, it seems like that's how twisted and manipulative she is. That's why I compared her to like Lisa or like a Light Yagami, for example, because they're these master manipulators who are kind of sociopathic. And that feels like a trope in itself in some characters in the community.
absolutely, yeah. What do you think the strengths are of this story?
Yeah, we've covered a lot of this, but very quickly, just how consistently erotic the chapters are. As I said, you can jump in any chapter and be turned on by what's going to be a hot wedgie scene. You don't have to worry that, like, in one chapter, it's not going to be a hot wedgie scene somewhere in there. Uh, any chapter you can hop in, same as Inheritance, and you'll see somebody giving somebody a hot wedgie. So I like that. But it's also its weakness too at the
Yeah,
same
I was
time.
gonna say I see that as just a weakness. 'Cause it's just it is basically just porn with very
Hmm.
extremely loose overarching threads tying everything
Yep.
together.
Yep. But that's why it's popular. That's why we're talking about it
Yeah,
today because it's hot. Because every chapter we could hop into, we're gonna be turned on because there's an understanding of what is arousing us, and
yeah,
it's porn, and it doesn't go beyond that. So it's its strength and its greatest weakness. Absolutely.
okay. Hmm. Well, I mean, the two strengths that I can really see here, I guess the two most prominent ones are having multiple older women. Yeah, I think that's something that sets the story apart from so many others. And the wedgie scenes are top notch. They fully encapsulate the emotions of every character involved. but I don't see your point as a strength really in any way. I just see that as a
Yeah.
weakness. That like it's just it's
Okay.
consistently just that, and there's really no
Yeah.
variety.
Gotcha.
There's a little bit where it's like there's one of the I can't remember which one it is later on in the story. One of them is just set up for, and there's no wedges that happen in it.
Yeah.
And that's actually the one that Wedgie Lover 109 comments on at the end of it, and he says like, "There's no wedges in this. Why does this one have the most views?" Um, like that is a little bit of variety in what's happening in the story, and I like that. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, that's I guess I won't continue to ramble on about it because it's just the same. I'm just saying the same thing over and over again at this point. So, yeah. So now for my classic segment, Which Earth? Would you like me to remind you what they are?
You're the host. If you feel like now the audience knows what they are, we can skip it. And I can take a stab at this.
Well, I guess I don't remember the last time I actually explained it. So
Sure.
for any new listeners or whatever, whatever it is, when discussing realism in stories, I have a question I like to pose. Out of the four Earths I'm about to describe, which do you believe Jake and Gwen falls under? And if any of you listeners have a differing opinion or you have your own ideas on what it is, let me know in the comments or send me a message about it. So we have realistic Earth, where Earth is normal as we live it every day. Alternate Earth, where Earth is changed to some degree, mainly focusing on wedgies. Idealistic Earth, where Earth is changed to fit the desires of the wedgie community or some aspect of it, depending on the writer. Or fantastical Earth, where Earth is changed to be unrecognizable, like Lord of the Rings and Dungeons and Dragons. And it can also be a mix of those four, it can change between them, or it can be none at all and be something entirely different.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. What do you think to start us off? I'm curious.
Idealistic, a thousand
Yeah, that
percent
makes sense.
idealistic.
Yeah, makes sense.
And the biggest thing is that there's no consequences for anything that happens.
Yeah, it's true. I
Everybody
mean
gets
that
wedgies and
and
everybody lives happily ever after.
exactly right. You summed it up. Like everybody, including the elevator, gives wedgies, and there's obviously no consequences. Not even a hint of one. The consequences is more wedgies happen, and
Hmm.
then more wedgies happen anyway. So it's
Yeah,
like that's not gonna change. It
and
seems no matter what.
and
Uh,
that could be a
Everybody's into
consequence.
them.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that could be a
maybe as the
consequence,
story goes.
but
We haven't gotten to one yet.
everybody likes it, so it's not a
Yes.
consequence.
Yeah, it's true. Is it a consequence if like plus even if you like obviously Jake's dad is a sort of disciplinary figure, he tries to punish him. They don't stop. That's the thing. Like it should be a deterrent, it's not. So they get punished, but they do it more anyway. So it's
Yep.
like there's no real consequence, it had
No,
no real effect.
he enjoys
It's
the
like a
punishment.
relapse almost, if you want to call it that. But yeah, so certainly idealistic, 100%.
Yeah.
It's almost fantastical in how everyone is a fetishist and how outlandish all the wedgies are in some ways. But I think when we talk fantastical on this podcast, that is restricted and limited to the truly fantastical
Yes.
worlds where magic is involved and things
Yes.
of that nature. But
Yes.
it is as sort of fantastical as you get,
Yes.
um, without being Harry Potter
Yeah.
and the
And
Wedgier's apprentice.
and this is where my definitions come in so handy because
Yeah,
that's this is why it's entirely idealistic because
totally.
it's changed to fit the desires of the wedgie community. And
Yeah.
I don't know of anybody in this community who doesn't desire every single person around them to be into wedgies.
Yeah,
That's completely an ideal that everybody wants to have in this community, and
totally.
so yeah, that is why
Totally.
it's so idealistic. That and because there's no
Absolutely.
consequences to anything happening.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, very good.
Yeah, that is the true ideal for all of us. Is
Yes.
maybe that's why it has such enduring popularity is because everybody around the main characters is into it
Yep.
and nothing bad happens because of it. Like that's the ideal right
Exactly
there.
right. It is. That's the ideal. You
Yeah.
summed it up. That's it. You summed it up.
This is the epitome of idealistic Earth right here. Oh man. So, is there anything else you'd like to discuss?
No, I think you summed it up perfectly as always. Great questions. Really awesome discussion.
Awesome. Is there anything you'd like to promote?
No, I say if you haven't, go read Jake and Gwen for some
Absolutely.
really hot scenes. Go give them a watch. We got 509 watchers, which seems low for how much of the content they've been putting out over the years with these different chapters and how consistently popular they are. Um, Plus, their story, Jake and Gwen, is one of these few stories that someone who wasn't them, just on their own, went out and commissioned a piece of art of the characters,
That's
which
true.
shows a great love of the characters and the
Yeah.
brand, and how much people want to see what they look like.
Yeah.
Plus, their one piece of art they had commissioned was very popular, a couple
Yes.
hundred favorites easily.
Yeah. But I mean, it is a pretty specific interest, and it's definitely not going to appeal to everybody. So I can kind of see
Sure.
why it's not bigger. But yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, it's
yeah,
he's
that's a good point.
he's
If you're
only
not into mother son wedgies, that sort of incestuous element, you can steer clear of the story. It's your
yeah.
warning.
Yeah, because there's really not much else that happens in it. There's
No,
not too much in the way of indirect detail, not too much in the way of character growth or anything beyond just porn.
totally,
So
absolutely.
it's a specific demographic, so it makes sense. But yeah, definitely check it out if that piques your interest, and check out the Inheritance as well. Check out all of Han's work as well, and
Thank you.
listen to the rest of these episodes. They're fantastic in my opinion. I have a great time doing it. So well,
Yeah,
there ends another golden discussion with Hans Gutherson. Thank you once again so much for coming on.
yeah, so great to be back. Thanks for having me.
Of course, you're welcome every single week. Now, if there are any topics, stories, ideas, etc., anything that you'd like to hear me discuss, or if you'd like to come on for an episode, leave a comment or send me a message on DeviantArt or Lucky Fetish as New Fatora. I received some fantastic ideas from a couple of wonderful listeners in the last couple of weeks, and I'll be implementing them as time progresses. And you'll definitely have to keep an eye out for those. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode of the Best Book Club.